Hi, this is James, and for today's video I want to talk about messaging and writing, and specifically like when it's either more direct or more subversive, and really what is the purpose of that and why I think it's valid to like criticize something for being more direct or more subversive, and really what that means, because I think a lot of people conflate this with a purely stylistic choice, and I think this is the most like universally objective you can talk about writing, specifically in regards to like you can tell the purpose of something, right? Like if that's something I feel like is understood with a lot of music specifically, or literature, is like there's a specific emotion wanting to be portrayed. How accurate is this work in portraying this emotion as it truly is in a way that someone can read it and relate to it, or read it and understand and feel what is going on? And that's why I think like there's varying levels of directness or subversiveness that are appropriate, right? For example, I didn't understand why Rothko was as successful as he was until I saw a Rothko piece in the MoMA. And that completely changed my perspective on Rothko. And all of a sudden, I not even fully, I'll just say I started to understand the actual emotion behind a lot of his work, because seeing it in real life, for whatever reason, just gave me a certain emotional reaction I wasn't anticipating, right? I think this is something that a lot of artists like kind of fall back on, is what's like what you're comfortable with. I do it a lot too, right? Like when I write, I usually write very direct because it's how I understand writing. I'm under the mindset, and I was under the mindset for a long time, that the more direct you are, the more potent what you were saying was, the more honest you are in that sense, right? Like if you're this direct, if you're this open about your own experience, that only gives more power to the words. And I know what that comes from. It comes from like what I personally felt most attached to when I was like, as I've been growing up, and like specifically like Kid Cudi, like he's not the most like metaphorical guy in songwriting, but he was extremely and is extremely influential to me in the way I think about writing. It's just now that I'm really starting to appreciate art that's more subversive in the way I'm talking about, because I think before I found like flowery language to be detracting from the messaging. Kierkegaard wrote about poetry and why it's not successful, usually in a Christian context, because in his mind, when poetry tries to be overly metaphorical, overly symbolic, it really just blinds and makes it inaccessible to the reader. It makes everything obnoxious and pretentious for no real reason other than this proves my intellect in art, which is the most dumb reason to do anything. You should never be trying to prove your intellect in art. I think that's something that like is more of a problem than being pretentious, right? Like I think it goes hand in hand, but like at least pretentious people are like trying to just do something for art's sake. You know what I mean? It's like the aesthetic choice. And that's the problem, is it's like pretentious people, I want to define this in that it's people who don't choose things for emotion, but they choose things for aesthetic. It allows them to gatekeep things that don't need to be gatekept. It's obnoxious for no real reason, right? There's no emotional backing behind it. Now, there's varying degrees of it. And yeah, like I don't think it's wrong inherently to be pretentious about certain things. I think everyone is to varying extents. But at the same time, there should be an understanding of when it's appropriate and when it's not. More so just like when it comes to being overly subversive, it really just makes things not easy to listen to. It makes things not palatable. And while that shouldn't necessarily be a factor that you're thinking about when making art, it should be something you consider when releasing it, because like the understanding that you could be making something that's really only enjoyable and can be understood by you is just kind of, again, like obnoxious. Not everything has to make sense though. I don't want to act like everything has to have a meaning behind it. I love Pavement, and they have many songs I feel like don't have any meaning behind it. And you have someone like a band that's kind of the opposite of that in a similar style, very directly emotional, like Dinosaur Jr., that really is extremely emotionally direct and raw and real. Yet I find myself being affected by both bands. And I don't want to just lampoon entirely subversive things or things that are metaphorical, things that are overly symbolic, because there is like value to that. Like, I'm just now starting to read like certain poets that I think delve into symbolism a lot. Like, I'm starting to read Rimbaud, and it's an understatement to say that he used a lot of symbolism. And I think there's a lot of potency in that symbolism. And not only that, but just like outside of that, in and of itself, you can have examples of symbolism being used in an inappropriate way. It still allows something to be a very raw emotional work. I mean, like, the most obvious example is like when you're in school and you're reading like The Great Gatsby, and like there's a ton of symbolism in it. It's very basic symbolism for a very emotionally raw work, and it allows it to be emotionally raw with still having like the eyes and the green light and stuff like that. It's not like the book is written entirely in prose. It's not a Virginia Woolf novel, which is very different, but I think still emotionally raw. And I don't know, like, who am I to criticize anything? I can only promote, I'm just going to promote good examples of it, because I don't think I have any standing to criticize certain, classics. At the same time that I can hold Rimbaud up this high, I can say someone influenced by him, like Bob Dylan, who writes very differently, but you can still somehow tell the influence, who writes so direct. When you read Bob Dylan lyrics isolated by itself, especially his early work, you find an extreme lack of metaphor, and it's high in observation. Now, what makes this so great is the way that he observes and the way that he puts it is so blunt in a beautiful way. It makes you understand that he's not really putting that much of his perspective in his work, as much as you understand the way that he is perceiving what is going on. And it's only, I think, when you start getting a little bit later, it becomes very experience-based, is right, like when you get to like Blood on the Tracks. Or really like I would say like maybe The Free Will in Bob Dylan is when it like really starts to become a lot more like experience-based, what he writes about. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's all great, right? But it's interesting to see someone have that progression who is so influenced by certain poets that were in this like symbolicist or whatever it's called movement. I don't know what to call it. For someone to be influenced by people who write in prose and then to write bluntly, but it's still in a weird sort of way reminiscent of the stylistic leanings of these poets. It's so fascinating, and it just shows that there's a lot of depth to what you choose to be subversive and direct about. And I'm going to take a step outside of art, because I don't know, like I think this applies to things outside of art. And when it comes to charity movements, and I want to specifically talk about, there was a recent Ice Bucket Challenge again that was for USC Mental Health, University of Southern Carolina, and all these people were like nominating people for an Ice Bucket Challenge, reminiscent of the original ALS challenge. And while I found it a little odd that they're repeating a previous trend that had already been extremely successful before, like I understood it. But it was kind of weird to me that they just fully copied the same trend. But if it's for a good cause, who am I to judge or complain? Not that I'm criticizing people who participated at all. I don't want it to seem like I'm in any way judgmental of people who participated, because I believe a lot of people did it with good intentions. But the amount of it that was just like doing it to do it, boosting popularity, no message of donations, no mention of the cause in a lot of these videos. All it was the trend. It was so devoid of meaning. It was like the most meaningless charitable trend. And I don't want to, I feel bad saying that, because I'm sure it did a lot of good. I'm sure there were people that donated. I'm sure they beat a fundraising goal. But for the quantity of videos made, for the quantity of people participating, it seemed as though the focus was barely at all on the substance of the movement. And just to step back to film, things don't have to be so direct. Too. Like, I feel like for every example I can name of a movement or a piece that had difficulties with it being too direct or too subversive, and I hope my broader point is being understood here of why this is a more objective metric you can use to talk about art, is with film. And like when you look at a lot of like new wave cinema, like French new wave cinema, it is so, symbolic. A lot of metaphors, and the stories aren't linear. A lot of shots that aren't depicting what's happening directly on screen. A lot of understood moments, things like that. They're still very beautiful films, and they usually communicate emotion. But like a movie that I love by Godard, Masculine and Feminine, the story is almost incomprehensible when you're first watching if you're thinking about it too linear. Characters literally get like shot and chased on screen and are understood to die off camera. And then all of a sudden they come back later and are just fine, and they proceed with the rest of the film. And yet I was still emotionally impacted by it, and it made me have an understanding of the character at the end. And if they were to make the story direct, it would leave me completely unsatisfied and irritated with the character in a way that would have just made me mad and not understanding, well, this character was blinded by how he viewed gender norms in that society. He was completely led by the fact that he is an egotist, and really like a narcissist in a lot of ways. Like, you lack that understanding if it's too direct, because it just feels like you're watching a bad person be a bad person for an hour and a half, instead of like going on that journey with the character where you're kind of led to believe maybe he's not all bad. And then by the end, spoiler alert, by the way, for this like 70-year-old movie, or however old it is, 60-year-old movie. By the end, you're left just being entirely disappointed, but still in a way knowing how he got to this place. So I think the older I get, the more I'm able to appreciate subversive things and things that are less direct. And again, like I'm a young guy, but the fact that I think my appreciation is starting to become a little bit more balanced is kind of telling of what this purpose of subversive things are for. It gives you the space. It gives you a lot of space to just revel in the meaning or substance behind something. But it's important to remember, what is the point of that space? Is there an emotional reason why you're letting someone revel in that space? Or are you just having them do that because you know they will? You know what I mean? Deepness for the sake of being deep. Nuance in a situation that doesn't need nuance is completely unnecessary. Sometimes people need someone to just be like, you're not alone, Whereas if you write some extreme ballad about, your mental health journey or something, and you use metaphors of like characters in classic literature or something, that would be the most pretentious bad song ever. Like, that would be so horrible, and it wouldn't really do anything to anyone. I don't know. I guess the point of this is just keep in mind, if you make art, how direct you intend to be, how subversive you intend to be. And not only that, just when you consume art, understand, is this meant to be direct? Is this meant to be subjective? Am I overanalyzing? Are all valid questions to consider. You'll never fully know where the artist is coming from, but if you try to see the emotion being translated across this medium, then you're pretty successful in understanding the work. And yeah, if you watch this video, thank you so much. This one is a little bit different than a lot of my other videos. It's not the same, just talking about like the Billboard top 10 or some artist I like. If you watch this far, like the video, subscribe, leave a comment. What do you want me to talk about? What are your thoughts on this? I want to know. This is very fascinating to me, and thanks for watching.